Our bodies come in different shapes and sizes, so doesn't it make sense that our weight loss plan should too? Noom builds a personal plan that factors in dietary restrictions, medical issues, and other personal needs so your plan works for you. One of the things I love about Noom is that it doesn't feel restrictive. Instead of focusing on what you can't eat, it helps you develop a healthier relationship with food. You can still enjoy your favorite treats in moderation, which makes it a sustainable approach that I can actually stick to. If you're looking for a personalized weight loss program that actually works, I highly recommend giving Noom a try. It's a program that's helped me achieve my goals and feel better than ever. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Go check out Noom today.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
All right. We're recording and we're back with Ken and Mike for My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz. It's been a crazy journey. This is episode 24, guys. We've been doing 24 hours of this.
A whole day of this.
Exactly. A whole full cycle.
And I'm exhausted.
Exactly. Yeah. It'd be interesting getting I know, Mike, have you been seeing some of the comments on YouTube and stuff? It's been, we have a couple really kind of devout fans there, but
it's nice to see that, people are really enjoying the episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a crazy story. I mean, it's like like I said, this thing's like a movie, and it's going to be a movie someday or a series or something. So that's what we're working on. But today, what we wanted to talk about, because we've been talking about, a lot of the people that have helped your uncles and Frank Morris escape Alcatraz. And one of those people was Whitey Bulger, James Whitey Bulger. And for people I think people who've been listening to this podcast know who he is. People who don't know, I mean, James Whitey Bulger is a notorious South Boston gangster who spent time in Alcatraz at the same time as the Anglin brothers, and actually spent time with Alfred at another prison. So there's a huge connection here. So he knows your family. So it's a weird connection. I mean, and I first really kind of got a full immersion of who he was. I did this crazy series for Discovery in 2013, where we followed around a bunch of bookies in South Boston, and there was 3 bookie crews. The thing was called St. Hood's, and we followed them around. It was kind of like a mockumentary. It was kind of real, but not real. And one of the groups in South Boston, the bookies that we were following around, was headed up by Pat Nee. And Pat Nee was a contemporary of Whitey Bulger. And so I was in that area, which is super small, very small. I mean, it's like the Southie or South, what they call Southie. South Boston is very much a very close-knit, small community. The houses are on top of each other. They have triples. They're like boom, boom, boom. You always notice about Southie and South Boston, you see the triple decker houses, and there'd be like 3 families living in them. So I used to hang out when we used to go to lunch. Pat Nee used to take me to this little Italian place on the corner, and that's where all of Whitey's old henchmen and button men used to hang out with. And they were kind of like making fun of us because we were kind of following around Pat and kind of doing this mockumentary about bookies and gangsters and stuff like that. And there was one guy that was sitting in the corner all the time, and while we were doing interviews and stuff like that, and he was always smirking. He always looked like a Cheshire cat, just sitting in the corner, not saying anything and stuff like that. And so I finally asked Pat, I go, Pat, who's that guy in the back? Every time we come in here, he's hanging out in the back there. And we're talking, this place is probably as big as these little restaurants. It's about as big as someone's living room. Not that big. It was like on a corner, and great Italian food. And he goes, that's Kevin Weeks. And I go, who's Kevin Weeks? And then I started looking up who Kevin Weeks is. And if people aren't familiar who Kevin Weeks is he was He was one of Whitey's butt men. You know, he was one of his right-hand man. And so that really kind of got me to looking into all of this stuff. And then while we were shooting it, they had caught Whitey. So they were bringing him. So as we were shooting, they had him in federal courthouse. His trial was happening, and so Pat Nee, because he was connected to him, was actually called to testify, and we actually kind of rolled that into the mockumentary we were making. So we had him talk about it. We had him and had them going into the federal courthouse. We got footage, and we kind of used it for our purposes for our storytelling. But I thought it was really interesting. But Pat Nee was, these guys are they're likable guys. You know, and that's what a lot of people said about Whitey, as crazy as he was. And Ken, let's start off firsthand. How did you first connect with Whitey Bulger? I think we talked a little bit about it, but just give us a little more of an origin story.
Sure. I really don't believe you can tell the Alcatraz story without mentioning Whitey. He's so intertwined into the story that I never knew it. And, my first interaction with him was in 2012. He had found out that we were going to be on the island for the 50th anniversary. And he reached out to an individual that was doing a book on him at that time. And he asked this individual if he would personally deliver a letter to my mom. And so he said, sure, I'll go out there for the 50th anniversary and I'll hand deliver this message. And so we're out there at the end of the interview that we did, the news conference. And this guy walks up to my mom and said, hey, I've got a letter here from someone who wants to meet you. And so my mom just basically, because there were so many people around us, people going, talking to us, coming up, asking us additional questions. And so my mom just pretty much put the letter in her purse, and we didn't even open it up until we got back to the hotel. And, at that time, we didn't really even know who Whitey Bulger was. And so as we started kind of looking him up, we were like, oh my gosh, this is a famous mobster, what in the world is he wanting to reach out to you for? And that's when we started realizing that he was friends with John and Clarence and Frank Morris. And so over the next few years, my mom would write him and he would write back to her. And it was just very kind of cordial. She actually tries to convert him into being a Christian. In fact, she even sends him a Bible in the prison. So I don't know how strange that is, but
I'm sure he didn't think it was strange at all.
Anyway, so it was.
I'm sure she's not the first person to try to convert him.
So it was kind of very back and forth, just pen pal type stuff, and he would share stuff about her brothers, and then in 2015, right after I got through doing this first TV documentary, I decided to, it's time to kind of take everything that I've learned over the years and I wanted to kind of put them down on paper. And so I was like, Whitey probably knows a lot of things about my uncles in the very last parts of their life, as far as at the prison, that I would love to know. So I asked my mom, I said, hey, next time you write him, ask him if it would be okay if I wrote him. And he wrote back, absolutely. And so
how many letters did your mom exchange with him before she did the handoff?
Probably about 14.
Oh, wow. 14, but she literally she was a pen pal with Whitey Bulger.
Yes, she was. And I've read some of them. They're very kind of, like I said, very cordial. They don't really kind of discuss anything other than just, he would talk about John and Clarence and how decent of men they were, and pretty much like that. And even with me, when I first started writing him, it was kind of the same way. I can look at the first letter. He didn't really kind of say a whole lot other than, he always started off talk about how great of a men they were, and they were dedicated to the escape, and how much admiration he had for them. And then he would go off into talking about his girlfriend or some other he always brought his girlfriend into any letter that we talked about, or he would go off and talk about things that he did in his past. And
his girlfriend that he had while he was in prison.
That is correct. So,
Okay.
well, when they were on the run, I believe her name was, oh gosh, I can't remember her name.
That's okay.
Mike can look it up for me. Catherine, that was her name, Catherine. When they got arrested, they tried to force her into telling where all this money that he had hidden, and so they threw her in prison along with him. And so he really hated that. I mean, that was the one thing he always talked about, how much he loved it. But so as we started kind of, chatting over the next few years, I started asking him more and more personal questions about Alcatraz, his involvement. At first, he came back and said, no, he wasn't involved in it. He pretty much kept to himself, and, he didn't really have a whole lot to say about it. But then as we went on, I noticed, I think in one of the letters, and this might have been where it started, he asked me, he said, don't call me James anymore, because I was writing, Mr. Bulger or James. He said, I want you to start calling me Jim, because all of my friends call me Jim. And I consider you a close friend. Okay. And then all of a sudden, all of these letters I started getting all of these different items in the letters, like all these postcards. One of the ones I can pull up right here, which to me is the wildest postcard in the world. This postcard, if you can see it, kind of go in.
Yeah, well, what you can do is you can take a photograph.
Yeah, I'll take a photo of it
and send it to me.
I mean, it was postmarked in 1907, and it's got a 1 cent Benjamin Franklin stamp on it. And the person that it was addressed to is not even him. I mean, it's a letter that some lady was writing her cousin, and on the front is Bunker Hill, Boston.
Mm-hmm.
This monument's still there today.
Oh yeah.
But I can't understand why he sent me this. And then he sent me several other postcards. One was postmarked in 1909. It had a 1 cent George Washington stamp on it. All these different postcards all of a sudden started showing up inside of these letters. And he would comment about how Ken, this postcard is older than I am. And then all of a sudden I got one letter that every one of the letters that I have all have a postmark, and they're metered coming out of St. Petersburg, Florida, all except one. And this one has 2 stamps on it. It is not metered, and he addressed it to a different name. He used to always say Mr. Ken Widner, and this one he says Mr. Kenneth Widner. And inside of this one is the one where he positively identified the Anglin brothers in Brazil. He took this photo that everybody has seen, and on the back of it, he wrote the Anglin brothers in Brazil. Now, why this?
How did he have that photograph?
I have no clue.
And he sent that to you while he was in prison.
While he was in the Leesburg Penitentiary in Leesburg, Florida. I think it's the Coleman prison. Actually, it's Coleman prison. But yeah, I mean, he just started sending all of these wild things. I even reached out to people that had corresponded to him before, including my mom. He never sent her one piece of, something like this in the letters. And I've even asked other people that have written him.
What year did he send you that photograph?
So that photograph, all of the other letters are metered with a date. So this particular one is not metered, so I have no date on it. And even in the letter itself that he's written, he doesn't put a date on it.
About, approximate when you received it? Do you remember approximate?
It had to be like in 2017.
So
okay. Most of my letters came in 2000. I started off in the early 2016. I got a couple of letters, and then I got oh my gosh, must have been a dozen of them in 2017. 2018, I got several more, and then eventually, I think my last one that I received from him was dated February the 22nd, 2017. So within that time frame, he sent 17 letters. But as we started going into it, he started opening it up more and more. I mean, he would tell me things.
Well, here, before you get into that, I just want to kind of, the photograph is really interesting. Now, at that point, was there any published on the internet, any photographs? That photograph was published to anybody?
It was, but it was never published. I mean, the only photograph that was published was the actual photograph itself. But if you look down at the bottom, it's got all three men with their age progression up under each one of them.
Got it.
So I have no clue where he got this from.
He could have printed it off the internet.
I didn't send it to him.
He probably could have gotten off the internet. Is it? What's
at the time in prison? He didn't have access to it.
Oh, okay.
So, but on the back, he talks about them in Brazil. I mean, he positively identified them in Brazil. He's the one who came back and said, this is exactly how he says it. The Anglin brothers in Brazil. Now, you tell me anyone, at that time, no one really kind of had put it together that they were actually in Brazil. So this is something to me, he was, and this is also where he identifies and says that he reminded me the very first time that Frank Morris spoke Spanish and that Brazil was Portuguese.
Yeah.
He kept telling me this over and over again, as though to tell me Frank Morris left and went back into Mexico. So, but, you know, it was just so amazing is that he kept, in one of the letters, he even said, I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. And that's when he starts going into what he did to help them in the escape. It's almost kind of like Whitey had this, and I mentioned it one time before, this code of conduct between criminals where they never ratted out anyone. They never would share anything that they knew on somebody else. So just like the guard who helped him in Atlanta prison during this escape, he never would even tell me his name. So, but he would go to Alcatraz for this person. Yeah. So it took him a while to open up to me, and then eventually he just started telling me things that was just, as Mike's read the letters, and I mean, Mike can testify. It's totally awesome what he tells in the very last sets of letters. Yeah.
Well, Mike, what was one of the most surprising things that you read in those letters? That, like, you couldn't believe it.
Well, one of the things. Well, how much time do you have?
Well, hey, listen, we have right now. We got like 40 minutes.
Okay. Let's start that stopwatch. He told a number of things, a lot of interesting details that he throws out in the letters that were just really fascinating. You really get a picture of what life was like in Alcatraz. Like, one of the things he talked about was, again, the code of conduct in the prison, because each cell was for one inmate at a time, or one inmate only, which we've talked about before. He says the unwritten rule at Alcatraz was you didn't go in, or as you're walking by, you didn't look into the cells, because the inmates really valued their privacy, and the other inmates valued the privacy of others as you're walking by. You didn't do that. And and if somebody did, if you were caught looking in somebody's cell, they would, the inmates would, sort of harass you and say, hey, what are you looking at? Kind of thing. And, it's like, you sort of broke an unwritten rule. He talked about that. Another thing he talked about was after the escape, there was a folk singer who wrote a song about the escape. It's called 1.5 miles, which is about the distance from Alcatraz to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And you can listen to it today on YouTube. Just type in 1.5 miles on YouTube, and you can listen to the song, and it's just all the lyrics are about the escape and, how they got away, kind of a thing, from the prison. And he talked about, I'd never heard that before. And so I went on YouTube and, like, there's that song that he talked about. Another thing he talks about, which we've sort of referenced a little bit, was because Whitey was an expert scuba diver. He understood the water, he understood the tides, how to stay alive in the water if you're floating, if you're unable to get to a boat, kind of a thing. And how do you survive in the water? Well, one of the things he told the brothers, or the three, I should say, was create a wetsuit for yourself, because they knew how cold the water was in the San Francisco Bay, and you use rubber cement you would just sort of seal up long johns on the wrists and ankles, and so you would have this air, between your skin and the wetsuit to protect you against the cold, because air is an insulator.
Yep.
He told him that trick. He told him how to breathe and not panic in the water, because if the raft failed or they fell in the water, what do you do to survive? He told him about that. One of the things that I thought was a real eye opener, we've talked about this a little bit before, was, Alcatraz was known for the hot showers, that the inmates would get 2 hot showers a week. And the reason that they did that was to keep the inmates from acclimatizing to the cold water in the bay. So if they just had the hot water, then you're not used to the cold, and you're less likely to survive. Well, Whitey told the 3, in your cells, you have cold water. The toilets and the sink are just cold water. They didn't have hot water. And so he told them, take towels, wet them down, and then at nighttime, lay on the cement floor of your cell, draped in these cold, wet towels, to acclimatize yourself to the cold water in the bay. He taught him that trick.
Wow.
And then he was also very good friends with Frank Morris. They were together in Georgia before coming to Alcatraz. And he actually tells a funny story that they were both leaving about the same time from Georgia to Alcatraz, because as Ken had mentioned, when Whitey Bulger was in Georgia, Atlanta, he was working in the infirmary, and there were several other people in the infirmary with him. Well, they all together planned an escape, and as Ken mentioned, one of the guards helped him with the escape by giving him files to cut through the bars.
Yeah.
And they were able to cut through the bars, and it's when they were in the process of escaping, they had a ladder that it was sort of a makeshift ladder, and the ladder didn't work quite right, and that it alerted the other guards that were making noise, and it alerted the guards, and they're on the roof of the infirmary when they're caught, and they're all smoking cigarettes, and they're telling them to come down off the roof, and they said, well, after we finish our cigarettes, then we'll come down. Well, of course, they knew that they had help because of the files. And so Whitey was thrown into the hole in prison, and he was there for 3 months. No light, just food and water. I mean, just minimal food and water. They're trying to starve him, trying to break him, because they wanted the name of the guard, and he never gave him the name. And so finally, after 3 months, the warden says, we're not going to break this guy. So that's when they sent him to Alcatraz because of this failed escape attempt. And he wrote in the letter to Ken that, you know how much I hate guards. I hate the guards. But the code of silence was so strong that he says, I wouldn't even rat out the guard's name. That's how much, how important it was to him. So that, at Alcatraz, he would never have ratted him out. He never would have done anything to endanger the escape. And of course, he did everything he could to help them with the escape. He didn't participate in it directly, but he did assist them. He would also provide materials to them, give them information that they would need, to help them along the way. So he was really an integral part of the escape, and without his assistance, I'm not sure they would have been able to pull it off. Oh, the other thing that he talked about was at nighttime, between 5:30 and 9:30 approximately, that was sort of their free time in their cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's after dinner, and it's 9:30 with lights out. So for about 4 hours, the inmates really had nothing to do in their cells. So a lot of them, they would paint, which is what John and Clarence were doing with the dummy heads, and they would do the paintings to mask the idea of what they're really doing with the paint. Well, when they were digging, they're making noise, of course, as quiet as you're trying to be. If you've ever been to the prison, it's steel and cement, and it echoes.
Yeah.
And sound carries in that prison. And so what a lot of the inmates would do was they would play their music really loud from their cells to mask the sounds of the digging and trying to get out of their cells so they can go onto the roof or the top of the cell block, which was their staging area. And so they would bang their cells, they would bang tin pots on the bars, they would play their instruments. They were all coordinated together, and Whitey was instrumental in making that happen as well. So that's how the guards never heard them, doing all the work before they actually got out of the back of their cells. So it's little details like that he just sort of sprinkles throughout all the letters that just sort of paints this picture of, that a lot of the inmates knew about the escape, and a lot of the inmates were actively participating in helping them with the escape.
Yeah.
Well, something else he put into the letters that really was eye-opening to me was he started describing the relationship between the escapees. He shared, how close John and Clarence was. He shared the relationship between John and Clarence and Frank Morris, and then he also brought in Allen West. And that was the first time I ever heard that Frank Morris had plans to stab and kill West if the escape went south in any way.
And did he explicitly said that in the letters?
Yes, he did. And what was amazing is that he even talks about that West had gotten a knife from the kitchen. He said it was a very large knife, and that this is what he was going to use on West if anything happened during the escape.
The knife. You said
Frank Morris, yeah. So Frank Morris had this knife that he was going to do West in with. So you said, and you go, okay, well, is that really true? But believe it or not, in the FBI files, in the second interview that they did with West, they asked him if anyone had a weapon. And his response was, I believe one of them had a knife that he had gotten from the kitchen. So, this is something that some people didn't even know about. And here, Whitey Bulger is sharing this story about Frank Morris had plans to do West in. And to me, I really believe that's the reason why West didn't go. I mean, a lot of people talk about how he couldn't get out of the cell. I really believe there was more to that story than what we have really heard.
Why did he talk about why he didn't join on the escape?
That's a good question. I believe because he wasn't in the same tier that they were in. I mean, this was pretty much, in this one cell area. He might not have had anyone that he could trust in order to do the digging. Because like I said, this was a 2-man operation. There was no way that you would have been able to sit in the back of your cell and do digging at night if you didn't have someone watching out for you. So, you could, but you take a big chance of getting caught. So, it could have been that he never said why he didn't go with them or why he was not involved in it. But I believe it was probably because he wasn't in the same tier area that they were in. So they had direct access to the roof where the vent was, whereas the other ones did not. So,
well, what he does say it indirectly. He does say that he chickened out, that it was because of fear that prevented him from escaping, and everything he says about West is always negative. He never says anything positive. He doesn't convey any qualities that he admired about him. It was all negative, that he had a big mouth. He was a racist. He used to hassle the black inmates who were there. We've talked before how the inmates saw West digging and they could have ratted him out.
Yeah.
But it was either Frank Morris or John, either Frank Morris or one of the brothers goes to Bumpy Johnson and kind of makes peace. And, because they hated the guy, the black inmates hated West because he was always hassling them. And this would have been their opportunity to get him in big trouble. And for the sake of the escape, which they deemed as more important, Bumpy Johnson said, just keep this guy away from my guys and we'll be okay, kind of a thing. So he, provided protection against West. But it was in April that West stopped digging. He claimed that he didn't need to dig further because he wasn't, like Ken said, it was John and Clarence who were doing most of the construction of things. The only thing West did was he made the paddles. He somehow got some wood and nailed the paddles together, but he did that in a cell. He didn't have to go out of the cell, whereas the brothers and Frank Morris, they had to go to the top of the cell block because that's where they made the rafts, the life vests. That's where they stashed their extension cord. They needed more room, and West only needed the room that was in a cell. So he wasn't doing the dummy heads. He was, and the only thing
there was a dummy head for him behind his wall, and the first time he ever used it, according to him, was when he does break through later that night. He grabs the head and sticks it in his bed.
But, the night of the escape.
Yeah, so the thing about West, though, and I keep kind of going back to this, is that if he truly was going to go with them, when the FBI questioned him about, and he gives the story about how he, what happened that night when he finally got out. I think I've said it before. He told them, he got dressed, he goes up to the top. He realizes he can't go through the shaft with his clothes on, takes his clothes off, goes through the shaft, pulls his clothes up, puts his clothes back on, realizes that they're gone. So he goes back, does reverse all the way back to his cell. And then they question him at the end. Well, why did you take your clothes? Because all the other three men didn't. John, Clarence, and Frank Morris left every bit of their clothes in their cell that night. When they went through that hole, they went through in their underwear, undoubtedly, because they had clothes on the other side that they were using. So my point is they didn't find any other clothes. So there was only 3 sets of clothes that they were using. So what would they have told Wes if he had broken out? If he had got out, where was his clothes?
Exactly.
They only had 3. So what were they going to do? What were they going to tell him? Oh, we didn't think you were going with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something more to Wes's story than what we really kind of know. And I really believe, Whitey shares the fact that Frank Morris did not like Alan West.
Yeah.
And I really believe he was going to kill him. And I believe one of the Anglin brothers, John, was good friends with Alan West. I mean, when I say good friends, he knew him very well. They had spent time in other prisons. And so I believe John went to him and said, hey, you better rethink about going with us because Frank Morris is not too happy with you.
Yeah. I mean, because everybody, your uncles, they weren't in there for anything violent. Frank Morris was a violent guy.
I still believe, for all of the other escapees to leave every bit of their clothes in their cells, they didn't take anything with them. And Wes does just the opposite. That just tells me he wasn't really involved in the last part of the escape. I believe the escape changed. I really do believe that the escape originally was going to go to Angel Island until, their friend
Mickey
Cohen shows up and the plan changes. And for whatever reason, they probably, and I'm sure Frank Morris was probably part of it, we're not telling Alan West one thing about this escape. We're not going to share with him anything because he was already blabbermouthing, the first part of the escape.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Beverly Hills Emergency.
Somebody killed my parents.
Pardon me?
I came home and I found them.
From the creators of Dahmer.
Okay, you have to shoot first so that you don't back out. Okay.
Based on the horrific true events.
When are we gonna do this?
Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, now play only on Netflix.
So I can see where they kept it from him, and I don't think they really even anticipated him going.
Yeah, one of the other things that Whitey talks about is, like I said, he had a big mouth. He had a hard time not talking to other inmates, and that's dangerous because we've talked before about how the guards cultivated their rats, their snitches in the prison, and nobody knew who the snitches were because if it became known, then that guy wasn't going to last very long. And you didn't know if the guy next to you was one of the snitches. And here, Alan West is talking to inmates about their escape and what they're doing and part of the plan. And when Morris finds out about it, he's furious. He's really angry, and which is one of the reasons why he had the knife. And according to Whitey's letter, he warned Alan, you don't talk to anybody. You stick with us. When we have our meals, you're with us. When we're in the exercise yard, you're with us. You don't go anywhere without us because we just basically can't trust you.
Yeah.
And so I think it was, now Alan West was really integral to the escape. He was the one that found the files when he was doing maintenance work in in the the access way that was in the back parts of the cells, where the two backs, there's the utility corridor where the pipes were, and they had done some maintenance work, and Alan was doing some cleanup. He was sort of like a handyman around the prison, so he had a lot of freedom. He was also aware that the shaft on top of the cell block hadn't been cemented like all the others. For some reason, they left that one uncemented, but they put bars across the opening, so you couldn't get to the roof without dealing with the bars. And he was aware, he had that information, and so he had the ability to also. He was the one that allowed the inmates to paint the top of the cell block. That later they hung the blankets. That's how they were able to cover their work on top of the cell block. Well, that was all because of Alan West, because he had got permission to paint the cell block top, because he had done it like a year before. So that was a little it was a known thing that he did, and the guards were like, sure, fine, you can do it. So he was important to the escape. Without his help, again, it would have been very difficult for them to
Well, it sounds like he was a useful idiot for them.
Right, but I think what happened was, their importance.
Yes, I agree.
His importance was obviously valued in the beginning, but then as they spent more and more time with him, especially Morris, it's like, this guy is causing us problems. And so I think they started distancing themselves between the three of them and him, and not given, like Ken said, when the plans changed, they just didn't bother to tell Alan West, we don't believe. And he knew the old plan and not the new plan, the revised plan with, through Mickey Cohen. And so, the night of the escape, I think, because like I said, he said that he stopped digging in April, and he was going to the night I'll finish digging when we get out. And it was much harder, took a lot longer for him to dig out the back of his cell. Morris is brought back down from the top when he was finishing the raft. He tries to help him on the corridor side. Clarence tries to help him. They're making a lot of noise. They finally abandon the idea after about 10, 15 minutes. And they go back to the top of the cell block, because John's able to get out at this point. So the three of them are making their way to the top, and they said, well, we'll come back for you. And of course they never do.
I'm not even sure some of that.
Well, that's what he claims.
We're basing this upon what West said.
Exactly.
So one of the things I asked Whitey, and he did respond in one of the last letters, because he kept talking about how that everybody at Alcatraz escaped that night, and how they basically set everybody free that night. And I asked him, I said, so let me ask you this: if everybody in Alcatraz was pulling for these three men to make it, what in the world would they have done to West if they found out he ratted them out, told the FBI, hey, we're going to Angel Island? So he puts the FBI on their trail, and this is what we were going to do. We're going to go rob a store and get some clothes and rob a car, steal a car, and we're going to head north. So he basically puts them on the route. I said, what in the world would have happened to him? He said, well, he would have survived about 3 seconds in the yard. And he said, Alan West said exactly what we told him to say. And you kind of put this together. I almost kind of believe they let Alan West tell this story because he was going to be the one who, think about it, the only information we have really about the escape is Alan West. He's the one who is the star of this escape because he's the only one telling the story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's his version and nobody else's version, other than now we have a lot more information. We have James Whitey Bulger to kind of share in some of this information.
Yeah.
But another thing that was really fascinating about something that Whitey shared, and I thought about this before, is that during the time of this escape, you've got 3 kingpins of the mafia organization at Alcatraz at one time. Now, Whitey hadn't quite come into his, he hadn't gotten out and formed the
Winter Hill Gang.
Winter Hill Gang, but he was very big in that, I guess, arena at that time. But you've got Mickey Cohen, you've got Pumpy Johnson, you've got Whitey Bulger. All 3 of them, if you think about it, participated in this escape. I mean, like Mike said, if Bumpy Johnson had not gone to the other black inmates and said, you don't say a word about what you hear, this escape never would have happened. If you didn't have Whitey Bulger participating in giving the information to John and Clarence and Frank Morris, this escape never would have happened. And if you didn't have someone like Mickey Cohen, who could have easily skipped the country. Well, in fact, Whitey Bulger says, we told him, leave, don't ever come back. And he comes back, and then the escape occurs. If it wasn't for him, this escape never would have occurred.
Yeah.
So you've got three, kingpins that helped in this escape that I don't think very few people know about.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think Mickey Cohen, probably made just a calculated move, thinking that, number one, that he wasn't going to be in Alcatraz a long time, and that he'd be able to, and he didn't want to be on the run for the rest of his life, because he's such a high value target. They would have went to the ends of the earth to look for him, and it would be harder for him to hide versus your uncles, who not many people knew about them when they were in there until they escaped. So maybe that was the case. Who knows?
Well, for Mickey Cohen, if he could have feared, he probably feared the government, that if you're in Brazil, they can extradite you, but you can disappear.
Yeah.
You look what happened in Chile when the CIA had the coup and overthrew the government, and like you were saying, in the early 60s, you had a lot of rogue people doing just playing by their own rules, and especially internationally in a small country, or not a small country, but a third world country like Brazil at the time, they can go in and do whatever they wanted, and Mickey Cohen, you never hear from him again.
Yeah.
But then you bring in to something that Whitey said in one of his letters. I don't think anybody knows this. I don't think it had ever even been known until Whitey wrote this in his letter. Whitey Bulger saves Mickey Cohen's life in prison from someone trying to kill him. Yes, when they were in Leavenworth, after they left Alcatraz, before they wound up in Atlanta. I guess they probably went to other prisons and eventually made it over to Atlanta, but they went to Leavenworth. And there was an individual in that prison that was fixing to kill Mickey Cohen. And Whitey Bulger found out about it and stopped it. Went up to the guy. This is his words in his own handwriting. I went up to the guy and he said, I told him, for every time you stab Mickey, I'll stab you 9 times. So, he pretty much put the guy down and said, you're not going to do this. I think he even said he was out in the yard lifting weights when someone come up to him and said, hey, there's a guy fixing to stab Mickey Cohen. And Whitey instantly went up and stopped the thing. So, that in prison, you don't get involved in somebody else's beef. According to unless you're friends. He had to be close friends with Mickey in order for him to go in and step in and stop what was about to happen.
Well, independent of that, what else did he reveal? Anything else about Mickey Cohen's involvement in the escape in the letters?
I kept asking him about Mickey Cohen, what he knew about him. And he pretty much just said kind of like the things that we already kind of know, that Mickey was going to be the first person to get out of Alcatraz, and that they went to Mickey and told him, hey, don't ever, flee to Brazil. This is what's so amazing, because this is exactly what the brothers and Frank Morris did.
Yeah.
Flee to Brazil, marry a local woman, have children, and they can never extradite you back to the country. And so he said they were shocked, or he was shocked, whenever Mickey shows back up. And this was, like in April.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course we know the escape occurs just a few weeks later. So outside of that, he never really poured in to what Mickey might have done or his involvement.
Yeah.
So nothing that I can say, okay, yeah, he said Mickey went and did this. So
the other thing was interesting that I'm gonna ask you. Because I would imagine in these letters, obviously, because the prison, they look at all these letters. Anything that goes to these inmates gets scanned. They look at them, they read them. So maybe that was one of the reasons why he was initially being cagey with you about right. some of the information, and talking about your uncles and stuff like that. He didn't want to reveal too much, because he was in for, being on the run when you were talking to him when he was in federal prison. He might have been unwilling to kind of put himself in another position where he was going to get charged with aiding and abetting something, a federal criminal escaping a prison. Could that been a bit? Because the way you're describing your communication, he was kind of spoon feeding you stuff in a very kind of cagey way.
Yes, he would. Sometimes I felt like, and even in some of these postcards, my wife always felt like that he was trying to tell me something with these postcards, like telling me something without saying it. Because like you said, anything that he wrote was probably scanned and read by, a guard before it got sent out, which was kind of strange about this one letter that I told you that I got that wasn't postmarked. It almost made me think that he wrote a letter to someone else, and they in turn took that and put it together and then sent it to me. Like it didn't really kind of come from it.
Did it come through the mail, or did it come through the mail, or just show up in your mailbox?
Well, it showed up in the mailbox.
Okay,
but
so
there's no postmark.
So then it didn't go through the mail.
Where it got mailed from.
It probably didn't get. They probably hand delivered it.
Because that's the crazy thing.
Because everything that goes to the post office gets metered like that. You can't.
Well, I have never seen one not metered.
Exactly. I've never have.
No. So, how it got to me is still to me a mystery. And like I said, this particular letter is so different than all of the others because the one thing, he calls me by my first name, Kenneth, rather than Ken. Every single other one's is Ken. And then, he, in all the other letters, he would say, I had him sending it to a P.O. box. It was, P.O. box, whatever. But this one, he spells out post office box. The only one he ever did this to. And it's just absolutely crazy.
Was that the last letter you received from him?
No, this was kind of like in the middle. So it was, I remember when I got it, I thought it was so strange because one, this was the only one too that has been stapled. So they're staple prints. All the other ones didn't have these prints in them. But this one, someone took a staple gun and stapled it. Then removed the staple because I've got holes going through it. But yet the holes are not in any of the letters nor in any of the photos. So
obviously someone got a hold of it.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, that it came not through the normal route that I got all the other letters.
Did he share any other information about Mickey Cohen other than him just, saving his life in the yard? Like during the preparation for the escape, did he tell you anything about that?
No. I mean, he did not go into any detail about Mickey Cohen. But then again, I sometimes didn't really think that he would. I tried him multiple times about Mickey Cohen, and he never would say anything. But like I said, he had this code. Yeah. Even if the person had died, he wasn't going to share things that he didn't want people to know. Me and Mike actually kind of believe that he might have actually picked up the business that Mickey Cohen was running, and he actually took it over. And I say that because he did send me a postcard, and I've seen this picture on the internet before, so I'm not sure exactly how it got out on the internet, but it's a picture that he had taken in Acapulco, New Mexico, in the early 70s, and he's sitting on this wall, and you could see the beach behind him. And I actually found where this was. It was actually at a church, a famous church in this, which is not too far from where we believe Mickey Cohen's farm was. I mean, in that area. So, what in the world was a Boston mobster doing deep into Mexico during that time frame?
Yeah, and he was a known felon. He was a known felon. I mean, how do you get a passport?
Yeah, that's a good question. And then on the back, he told me, he said, "Ken, this was the happiest days of my life." So, was he down there meeting someone? I mean, who took the picture? I mean, he's out there. He doesn't have a shirt on. He's very well tanned, and you could tell he was very young. And I don't know. What in the world would someone from Boston be doing deep into Mexico like that?
Sounds fishy.
Yeah, definitely does. So.
Wow. So what else? Anything else interesting that these letters kind of helped you understand who your uncles were, and anything that relates to the escape that kind of helped you connect a lot of the dots that we're currently trying to connect?
Well, he does repeat a number of times his great respect for them. They were good guys. They were quiet. One of the things he said is they were very smart in that they laid low. They didn't cause any problems. They didn't, when you looked at them, you didn't suspect that they were doing anything. He tells a story when he was at another prison. I think it might have been Leavenworth, I believe, where I guess they have this track. And when people were getting ready to escape or plan an escape, all of a sudden they start running and jogging and starting to get into shape. And he says when if a guard noticed you doing something different, sort of atypical of your behavior, that's a red flag for them. They start like, okay, this guy's planning something just because they're exercising when they never did before. So, and or when 2 or 3 people were walking, they'd be looking around, kind of like, is anybody seeing us? Anybody following us? So Whitey knew the telltale signs of people that were planning things, and the guards, of course, would pick up on these little cues as well. And he said the brothers never did that. They were very smart in that they were always very low key. They never did anything that would alert attention. So you would never guess in a million years that these guys are planning anything. And so he had very high regard for them. Ken told the story about the first time he ever saw John. It reminded him of Steve McQueen. He just had this look about him that was very complimentary. He had nothing but good things to say about him. And he really thought that they were heroes, for him and for everyone in the prison, because they pulled off the impossible, and he held them in very high regard. He mentions that many, many times in his letters.
Yeah. So did he reference their escape and how he felt about it?
Mm-hmm. He did. He talked about the escape many times, about how that, they were successful. I mean, he said that many times, how successful they were in the escape. He doesn't, he never came back and said, oh gosh, I'm not sure they made it. He had no doubt in his mind that they made it.
Although he does tell one story, when the night of the escape, when they're on the roof, when they're going in through the little shaft between the top of the cell block and the top of the building, there's like a metal covering on top of the hole. And so they pushed the covering off, and it landed on the roof with a big thud, made a lot of noise. And there were seagulls. If you've been to Alcatraz, there's a million seagulls on the island.
Yep.
And so there were seagulls on the roof, and they all start squawking and flying off because they're startled by this noise. And actually there was another, and Whitey heard the sound of the roof noise. And there was a guard that he talked about, Edward Herman. He called Herman the German.
Herman the German. I remember Herman the German.
Right. And he was a young guard. He hadn't been a guard for very long, and so he was inexperienced. And when Whitey recognized the sound, he knew that was them, and so he starts banging his cells. He starts using the bed. He's kind of lifts it and
making noise, yeah,
right, making noise to distract the guard. And Herman just sort of like kind of sloughed it off and kept going on his duties. And I think some other inmates did the same thing, because they knew, because Whitey said that night he was just laying in his bunk, just waiting and listening and just anticipating what was going to happen, because he knew that was the night. And he was very afraid for them, because of course, if any of the guards in the guard tower spotted them, they would have been shot and killed on the spot. No hesitation. And so he's very concerned about them. And then of course, when they make the noise again, it's like, this guy can alert everyone and they're going to be dead. So he immediately, makes the noise to distract them. Unfortunately, because of his inexperience, the guard just sort of goes on his duties. It's sort of like, well, I guess I didn't hear anything, or it's just whatever. And then of course, the next day when they were escaped, he wrote in his letters how they just tormented this guy, because it became known that, they had gotten out. and they were ribbing him and making fun of him, and you're never going to make lieutenant, your career is over, and the guy felt a lot of remorse for not acting on the information that he had the night before. And he's also got into a bit of trouble because at midnight, just before he got off the shift, he was supposed to do head checks, and he didn't do it that night because he was behind in his duty. So he signed off that he had, but he hadn't actually done it. And so, again, they were just really, really getting after this guy because of what happened. But again, Whitey stepped in when he realized the danger they were in at that moment because of the noise they made, and thinking on his feet, he did something and it worked. It saved the escape from being, discovered.
It's crazy. So how did you finally leave it? What was the last letter you had with Whitey?
Oh my gosh. I believe like I said, the last one, I believe that was the one where he shared, I think that was the one where he shared about actually, I believe it was the boat. I was pretty shocked that he came in and talked about how that, 2 days after the escape, he said they all learned that they had found the boat on Angel Island, the raft, and that the guards had found it. And, I had no clue that he was actually telling the same story that we would later, include in the book with Cliff Fish, who is the guard, along with another individual from the island that claims to have found the boat, the raft, brings it back to the island, and of course then it disappears. And so, as Mike said, I'm sure that all of the inmates, they hear guards talking, and so that's probably where he heard it from. But he just kind of backs up what Cliff Fish had said, that the raft was found on Angel Island.
So that was the last letter. And what do you remember when that letter was dated? Like when it was?
I just checked. It's in February of 2018.
Yes, it's February the 27th, 2017.
No, it's 18. It's 2018.
I'm sorry. You're right. I'm right. I had it in a different order.
That was about 6 months.
It's February the 5th. 2000.
Yeah, I was going to say. So it was about 6 months before he was killed inside.
Yeah. Yes.
And I asked Ken, after he had died, I said,
see if there's anything in here.
Because he had written them pretty regularly. Whitey had a lot of time on his hands, and I
forgot. He actually sent me this inside of it. It's the picture of Fred Breezy and John's wife.
So how did he get? Is it what kind of paper is on? Looks like it's on photo paper.
That is on. It's got HP on its photo paper.
Okay.
Where I got it.
So he printed it out from the internet.
Yeah, but there again, he's in prison. He doesn't have access to the internet.
He must have. No, I mean, someone
He also sent one about Clarence Carnes, and on the back he writes about the Choctaw Kid, and he writes about his knowing him. So the last letter is, like I said, it's right here. I can go through it and read it, but it would take a while because his handwriting is so small.
Well, and I asked Ken, because he wrote pretty regularly. They wrote back and forth for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. And it wasn't like, okay, this is the last letter I'm writing. It was just the last one that he wrote. And Ken said, because he also talked about his health, how his health was really poor. He was 89 when he died, and he'd had several heart attacks. They didn't think, a couple of those heart attacks were major ones. They didn't think he was going to survive the night.
Somehow two in one night.
And of course, the medical care in prisons are not the best. They'll get around to taking care of you while you're dying. So I think he just had sort of run out of gas. He was just kind of done. He just didn't really have the energy anymore because he talked about his memory was really poor. It was hard for him to remember things. So I think he just sort of just stopped in general. If he wasn't murdered in prison, he probably wasn't going to last much longer anyway. I mean, in the end, he was wheelchair bound. He couldn't even walk anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when they were able to, get him in Florida when he was in the wheelchair. They left him alone. The guards left him alone.
No, it wasn't Florida. It was it Virginia?
I'm sorry, not Florida. Anyway, they left him alone for about 10 minutes. And that's when they came in and got him. And actually, there was a thing in the paper just the other day or recently about one of the guys that murdered him finally got,
sentence.
Yeah, sentence for the murder, and it took a few years for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, because don't need a speedy trial if you're already behind bars.
No.
Yeah. So he wasn't going to last much longer anyway. His health was pretty bad at the end.
Well, I just think it's an extraordinarily interesting connection, and that it was like the perfect storm that happened, in that year in the early '60s when your uncles were in Alcatraz and just happened to be there with Whitey Bulger and Bumpy Johnson, and how they all kind of conspired and kind of supported what was going on and kept everything under wraps, and everybody had a hand at them succeeding in getting out. Even the useful idiot Alan West.
Well,
so,
it's just amazing how many inmates knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
How many guards didn't know about it? It's like,
yeah.
In what prison would that many people know about it and not? You have one snitch somewhere that's going to share something with one of the guards.
Yeah.
To get favor or whatever, but nobody in the whole prison, ever said a word.
Well, especially there, they had the high ratio of guard to inmate. I mean, they had like how many guards were there? It was like 250 inmates. How many guards they have?
Was it like 2 to 1, 3 to 1?
I think it was 3 to 1.
3 to 1, yeah.
So it's probably like 70, 80 guards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that never happens. I mean, you go to prisons now. It's like they're all push button Sally ports, and they have pods out like this, and they have one guard who sits in this booth, and he's observing 200 inmates or like 100 inmates, and you can just open their cells, just like and then close them, have them come out at single file, and then there's not that many. And I've been out in the yards in a lot of prisons, when I was doing that documentary series Lockup years ago, and I couldn't believe, and they, even the correctional officers at the time, they said, listen, we don't run this place, they do. Because we just keep them from, they run it. It's like it was like a John Carpenter movie. That's all I can, it's like crazy. So, I mean, there it was totally different. It seemed like the guards pretty much ran the prison.
They did.
And the fact that they were able to keep everything so quiet for so long and do all the stuff they did. I mean, they just assumed, I think they just kind of rested on the laurels of the fact that they're on an island surrounded by water.
That's what I believe. I believe they were overconfident and believing that, even if they did get out of their cell or they made a run for it, the bay was going to stop. That was going to be the end of their plan. They were going to shoot them. They were going to kill them, and they would never make it off. And that was pretty true, for most of the escapes. It ended at the water. So. Yeah.
Well, fascinating as usual. The Whitey Bulger connection, so weird. And I think it's, to me, it's just kind of, the more and more I learn about this thing, this escape, it's more fascinating the more we talk about it. And, and then like I tell everybody, everything's in the book. So get the book, read it. And we're going to keep on pushing forward with these fantastic stories. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Just